We are now rapidly approaching the end of the Discourse on Method. We're still using the Hackett edition, and we are in part 6. And Descartes has just been describing his master plan for making human beings, the masters and possessors of nature, using science and technology to control the world so that then we can be happy with it, and in general replacing traditional ethics of acceptance with a new ethics of technological control. Now, part 6 of the Discourse, Descartes says, and this is important for reiterating what is his scientific strategy and also his political social agenda. Descartes says, "But the order I have held to has been the following. First, I have tried to find in general the principles or first causes of all that is or can be in the world, without considering anything but God alone who created the world, and without deriving these principles from any other source but from certain seeds of truth that are naturally in our souls." So you'd have to go back to part 5 to review what he's now stating here more succinctly. He thinks you can think about how God created the world and how there are certain ideas built into our souls of how the world works, and using just those two things you can figure out the basics of physics, really. That's basically the general idea here. And from that you can figure out a whole lot of other stuff in science, and from that you can figure out more, but at some point you lose the ability to figure it out just by sitting and thinking. You have to go out and do observations and experiments. After that, I examined what were the first and most ordinary effects that could be deduced from these causes, and it seems to me that by these means I have found the heavens, stars, and earth, and even on the earth, water, air, fire, minerals, and other such things that are the most common of all, and the simplest, and as a consequence, the easiest to know, reviewing what he went over in part 5 of the Discourse on Method. Then when I wanted to descend to those things which were more particular, so many different ones were presented to me that I do not believe it possible for the human mind to distinguish the forms or species of bodies that are on the earth from an infinity of others that could have been there, had it been the will of God to put them there, nor as a consequence to make them serviceable to us, unless we advance to the causes through the effects and make use of many particular observations. So there's a few things to clarify here, if I have enough brain cells. First of all, again, he's talking about how just by sitting and thinking, basically, and specifically thinking about God and about certain ideas that are built into our minds about how the world works, we can figure out a whole lot about the world. But it has its limitations. It won't eventually give you a lot of details about, for example, oak trees versus some malorns. I don't think they exist. I think that's the name of a tree in Tolkien only. An oak tree in our world versus a malorn in Lorien from Tolkien. You have to do observations in the world to find out what sort of actual trees exist. You can sit and think and figure out a whole lot about how the world works, and you can figure out a lot about the laws of physics. You could probably sit and think about using now contemporary terminology, gravity and inertia, and maybe even the Earth being round and a lot of other cool stuff, but you won't be able to figure out, did God actually make, using these general principles, malorn trees or oak trees? You have to go out into the world and study stuff. So at this point, in terms of the method of doubt in part 4 of the Discourse, we are now several stages up from the foundations of knowledge. The absolute lowest point of knowledge, lowest here being a good thing, the lowest part in the foundation of knowledge is I think, therefore I am. Then building on that, God exists. Then building on that, we can know that the world outside the mind exists. My 5 senses put me in contact with it. Reason can be trusted, etc., etc. Go back and review other stuff from part 4 on the subject if you don't remember this. And building on that, you get Cartesian metaphysics, and building on that, some of the basics of the new science Descartes is advocating. But above that, you can't just figure out things by sitting and thinking. You have to go out in the world and do observations and experiments. And that's why you have not just some scientific theories, but a scientific research program of investigating these things. And note that on the lower levels of knowledge, I think, therefore I am, therefore, based on certain ideas in my mind, etc., God exists, therefore, etc., etc., the world outside my mind exists, therefore, metaphysical theories of Cartesian dualism in part 5, therefore, basics of physics, etc., etc. For a lot of this stuff, you're doing deduction, meaning you're using arguments where the premises are designed to guarantee the conclusion. It's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Every argument Descartes does in part 4 of the Discourse, I think you'll find, is deductive. The premises are all meant to guarantee the conclusions. But up at this higher level, I don't know, 6 at the least, we're doing induction, which is to say, we're doing probabilistic reasoning. I'm using standard technology now from the logic textbooks. Some people use the word induction in a somewhat more narrow sense. I'm not. When I say induction here, I'm just meaning reasoning that is not deductive and that is probabilistic. Reasoning that is not designed to guarantee the conclusion. It's reasoning that's designed to render the conclusion probable if the premises are true. And that's what scientific reasoning normally is. Well, if we had time, we could talk about falsification as deductive scientific reasoning and Karl Popper, but not the time for Karl Popper. Right now we've got to do Descartes. Inductive reasoning is, probabilistic reasoning is what science is normally thought of as doing, other than Karl Popper's deductive falsification. And that's definitely what Descartes is talking about. Inductive scientific reasoning, probabilistic scientific reasoning based on particular observations. And you need this at higher levels of knowledge, but certainly not down at the foundation. All right. If there's anything else I need to clarify, I've lost track of what it was, so let's keep going after this. Passing my mind again over all the objects that have ever presented themselves to my senses, I dare say I did not notice anything in them that I could not explain easily enough by means of the principles I had found. So, sitting and thinking will get you a long way. But, he continues, but I must also admit that the power of nature is so ample and so vast, and these principles are so simple and so general, that I notice hardly any particular fact without at once knowing that it can be deduced in many different ways from them, and that ordinarily my greatest difficulty is to find in which of these ways it depends on them. For, to this end, I know of no other expedient at all except to search once more for some experiments which are such that their outcomes are not the same if it is in one of these ways rather than in another that one ought to explain the outcome. Good heavens. How did I not have this highlighted before? That's a beautiful statement of science. Now, I don't have time in this video anyway to stop and say, what is science? And what's the verification, the verifiability criterion for science from logical positivism? And what is the falsifiability criterion for science from Karl Popper? And what is the alternative theory from Thomas Kuhn? And are there any other important theories? I go over this in some detail in the series on Thomas Kuhn. But very loosely speaking, you could define science very roughly as something like this. The practice of studying the world through observation and experience and coming up with theories that don't fit all possible accumulations of data. Theories that don't fit all possible accumulations of data. And Descartes mentions that it is expedient. To this end, I know of no other expedient at all except to search once more for some experiments which are such that their outcomes are not the same if it is in one of these ways rather than another that one ought to explain the outcome. There. I think that's him stating we need to do science using that definition. We need to do experiments such that if things are one way rather than another, the outcome of the experiment will be this way and not the other. So again, he's advocating science. As to the rest, I'm now at the point where it seems to me I see quite well what approach one must take in order to make most of the experiments that can serve this purpose, but they are of such a kind of so great a number that neither my adroitness nor my financial resources would suffice for all of them, etc. That is why I meant to make known to the treatise I had written, and to show there so clearly the utility that the public would gain from such knowledge, that I would oblige all those who desire the general well-being of men, that is to say, all those who really are virtuous, etc., both to communicate those experiments they have already performed and to assist me in the search for those that remain to be performed. Okay, so he's moved on from talking about you can sit and think and figure out certain general principles about how the world works, just from thinking through God and the soul. And then you have to do experiments to work out the details. Now he's talking about how there's so dang many of those experiments, and I'm only one person, and I have a finite number of brain cells, and at some point I'm going to die. Even if I have a very long life, I'm still eventually going to die of old age, and other people need to be doing this work too. And there's two things we need. Well, maybe three things. One, people like me who are trying to do these experiments could really use some money. Descartes will ask for money a little more explicitly in a bit. Two, we need more people working on it. And three, we need to share our information with each other. So this is why he'd originally meant to publish that book. Not this book, another book. The book he talked about before in parts 5 and 6. The one that he decided not to publish because of the case of Galileo. And instead he's publishing this book as an alternative, stating his agenda for the new sciences. And he says, let's not skip over this completely. Let's not pause and say further things about ethics at this point, but he does mention that desiring the general well-being of people is what it means to be virtuous. And it looks like he's toying with a utilitarian ethics, not a virtue-based ethics, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail here. Anyway, that sure makes sense. It sure fits with his ethics of control rather than of acceptance, which is largely the point of part 6 and indeed of the whole dang book. Let's keep going. I'm half inclined to finish this whole part 6, but at least I'm not going to quit just yet. Maybe we'll do one more video. I can't promise anything. Since then, other reasons have made me change my mind. The case of Galileo, about publishing the other book. But he doesn't want to lose any occasion to benefit the public. Nevertheless, he says, I must not in any way consent to their being published during my lifetime, meaning the things thought and observed and argued in that other book. So he's not going to let it get published in his lifetime. He doesn't specifically mention, because he doesn't want to get in trouble like Galileo did, but he does give other reasons about the hostilities and the controversies. Oh no, this is close enough to admitting that he doesn't want to get in trouble like Galileo. I must not in any way consent to their being published during my lifetime, so that neither the hostilities and the controversies to which they might be subject, nor even such reputation as they could gain for me, would give me any occasion for losing the time I have intended to use in instructing myself. So I think he is alluding to, I don't want to get in trouble like Galileo did. But he's doing it so rhetorically, it's hilarious. He could just say, I don't want to get in trouble like Galileo. But instead he says, I don't want to get involved in any controversies, and I don't want to acquire any totally undeserved reputation for being super wise and smart and informed. And also, I'm so busy pursuing knowledge by doing these experiments. I don't have time for all that. So you can take this, if you like, as false humility, hiding a false humility, barely obscuring a fear of getting in trouble like Galileo. If you want to read Descartes that way, I think that's reasonable enough. I'm inclined to think of it that way myself. Perhaps I'm being a little too harsh. Everyone is obliged to secure as best he can the good of others. To be useful to no one is, strictly speaking, to be worthless. Seriously important statement again of his ethics. To be useless is to be worthless. That sure does sound different from the conventional ethics. Remember Milton's poem on his blindness? How does it go? Patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God doesn't need man's gifts or work. I can't remember how the poem goes, darn it. Look it up on the internet. Milton on his blindness text. Google that, and you should find it. The poem ends with Milton reflecting on how he's going blind, and so he feels useless. And he reconsiders this, and the virtue of patience speaks to him. I think it was patience, saying, you can serve God even if you're completely useless, just by standing and waiting. They also serve who only stand and wait. That's a statement of what it is to have value. What it is to have value is just stand and wait in service and respect to God, even if you're not accomplishing anything useful. That's Milton. And Descartes says a very different sort of ethics. To be useful to no one is to be worthless. Okay. He talks about how he still doesn't know much compared to what there is to know. And I will skip over a lot of text here. I'll pass over his dissing of the scholastic intellectuals of his day who like Aristotle a lot, and here's where he asked for money. Let's get to that, and then I'll have to make a decision about whether to quit this video now or whether to keep going and see the end of the book in this video. If there is any task in the world, here in the Hackett edition, we're now on page 40, if there is any task in the world that could not be accomplished so well by anyone else but the same person who began it, it is the one in which I am working. So, fancy way of saying, I, Descartes, am the most qualified to keep working on this. On what? On the science that's now established by my metaphysics, which is now established by my new method of gaining knowledge from part 4 of the Discourse. As applied in part 4, but articulated in part 2. One man alone cannot suffice to perform them all, meaning the necessary experiments, but neither can he usefully employ hands other than his own, except those of craftsmen, etc. In this way, if there were someone in the world whom one assuredly knows to be capable of finding the greatest things, and the things as beneficial to the public as possible, and whom for this cause other men were to exert themselves to help in every way to succeed in his plans, I do not see that they could do a thing for him. I do not see that they could do a thing for him, except to make a donation toward the expenses of the experiments he would need, and for the rest to prevent his leisure from being wasted by the importunity of anyone. Basically, I'm the best qualified to keep doing this work. Give me money, please, so I can keep doing it. It's hilarious. He's asking for money. Let's see. I got to pause and think through the remaining 1, 2, 3 or so pages of this text and decide. I'm going to keep going in this video. And I am deciding to continue. Let's finally wrap up part 6 of the Discourse on Method, and with it, this whole, well, I would say series on the Discourse on Method, but I'm inclined to think tomorrow, same time, same recording time anyway, and next week for you, same watching time. I'll keep going and do the meditations on first philosophy. No promises. But let's wrap up the Discourse in any case. I have resolved, we're now on page 44 at the end, I have resolved to spend the rest of my life on nothing but trying to acquire some knowledge of nature, which is such that one could draw from it rules for medicine that are more reliable than those we've had to the present, etc. He's committed his whole life to medical science, etc. About this, I'm here making a declaration which I know very well cannot serve to make me eminent in the world, but I also have no desire to be so. I don't want to be famous. But I also have no desire to be so, and I shall always hold myself obliged more to those by whose favor I enjoy my leisure without hindrance than to those who might offer me the most honorable positions on earth. So, going back to when he asked for money, in the same sentence you may have noticed, he doesn't just ask for money, he says, some of you could make me a useful donation to help with the research, and everyone else, you should just leave me alone so I can work. Or maybe do what you can to prevent other people from interrupting me. I think he's saying there ought to be some rich people out there who can donate some money to help with my research, and then there ought to be some other powerful or influential people, probably government people in particular, who can give me a little space and time to work and keep other people from bothering me. Something like that. And he closes his book with the same sentiments. I don't want to be famous, and I am much obliged to those, not those who want me to be famous and have honorable positions on earth, but to those by whose favor I enjoy my leisure without hindrance, meaning those who give me space to work in peace. All right, thus says Descartes, and thus closes the Discourse on Method, and I hope some of you watched this whole thing and enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I like talking about these books, and I really hope, also speaking of books, some of you will read the book. The book is much better than any lecture on Rumble or YouTube or any movie. Read good books, okay? Thanks for watching.